Check Podcasts.
Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce, and that's why this is Chamber Chats, coming to you, as always, from the podcasting studios here at the Czech Media Group, one of our chamber champions. As always, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I live and work in the unceded ancestral territory of the Lekwungen-speaking nations, known to us as Songhees and Esquimalt. And Chamber Chats are made possible by the support of Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union. We've been doing a series of conversations on our Chamber Chats about how people are recognizing and managing their mental illness and their mental health, because it's really something that we encounter every single day of our lives, all the time. One of the, I'm going to say pioneer, but one of the people that I first encountered who spoke openly about mental illness, mental health, is my friend Andrea Paquette, who is joining me right now to join us on the podcast. She's the president and co-founder of the Stigma Free Society. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. So good to see you again, and really appreciate being here.
Yeah, as I say, you were one of the first people to really be outwardly facing and come public with the fact that you had some issues with mental illness in your life, and you chose to use that experience to do something about it. So tell me, why was that important for you to do that?
For sure. Well, Bruce, I don't think I was the first one, but definitely in 2009, when I did come out with my personal story, it wasn't something that was talked about widely. And so it's very important, even during those times, like I would plug in mental illness into Google and you would see nothing but black images, scary faces, and violence was often one of those things that would come up with mental illness as well. So I feel it's really important that we have open conversations about mental health to ignite stigma-free environments.
Yeah, stigma is the word we're going to focus on for some of this stuff. And actually, the focus of what we're going to do today, you and I, is talk about what you do with younger people. But can we just talk a little bit directly about the issues? You had bipolar in your life. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 25. So that is over 21 years ago now. And so with bipolar disorder, it's a lifelong illness. It isn't something that can be cured. I experienced a very tragic time in my life. When I was 25 years old, I experienced a psychosis where I was seeing things, hearing things, believing things that weren't real. I didn't have a grasp on reality, a depression so deep that I attempted to take my life. But I managed to heal, and it took me a good 4 to 5 years. And then that was the start of the charity Bipolar Disorder Society BC originally, which then evolved into Stigma Free in 2016.
Yeah, to hear you tell that story, I think would empower some people to come to terms with what they may be dealing with. And I want to come back to the stigma thing right now, because it's still, unfortunately, we've come a long way, due to leadership from people like you. But there is still a stigma when it comes to talking about mental illness and mental health. What are we going to do about that?
There definitely is. And so that's why the Stigma Free Society exists. The first step is education. So in educating our younger generations, most especially, and to inform people about the facts about mental illness and mental health, that it's not something that is scary. It is something that can be managed. And it's just vital to not only start the conversations, but then take action. And so I always say it's wonderful to talk about mental health, but what are we going to do about it?
Where does that, again, in your case, where did the strength come from, if you will, to undertake managing your mental health?
Well, during my second hospitalization, I met a wonderful psychiatrist named Dr. Song, and he is still my psychiatrist to this day. He helped me see the light. It really took somebody being there for me, helping me understand that I was very capable, that I was smart, that I was a good person, and somebody who really, really believed in me. I had to go back on medications. I understood at this point that what I was doing was not working. I kept getting sick. And with my psychiatrist, it was really wonderful because I was able to rebuild my life. And that was just the first stepping stone. There's many things when it comes to your mental health. Yes, medications for some people works well. And, self-care and exercise and nutrition. And you have to bring together all of these components to live well.
In some of the conversations we've been having before this one with you, we touch on the idea of using the term mental illness as much as mental health, because in some ways mental health is an outcome right? It's something that
Mhm.
you work toward. But do you think we use mental illness often enough to actually describe what it is that's afflicting people?
Yeah, well, mental illness and mental health are two separate things, in my opinion. Mental illness is things such as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, generalized anxiety disorder, depression. So these are mental illnesses. We all have mental health. And so when our mental health is affected detrimentally, it doesn't mean somebody has a mental illness. So truly, that is how I see it. And when you have a mental illness, again, it can be managed. And I think a lot of people seem to forget that.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that clarity. That's important. So, a lot of the work that you do involves working with students in school. I want to talk about that next. Our guest today on Chamber Chats is Andrea Paquette. She is the president and co-founder of the Stigma Free Society. We're talking about managing of mental illness and mental health too. So you go into schools and do stuff. Tell me about that.
Oh, definitely. It first started with myself walking into a classroom with 15 students in Victoria, actually, and sharing my personal story about bipolar disorder, about getting well, igniting hope. People often feel very hopeless. And so now, today, with the Stigma Free Society, we have 23 virtual presenters who present in classrooms virtually across Canada. We do a lot of work in school. So these virtual presentations, they teach mental health literacy, and they also have somebody sharing a personal story about stigma and or mental illness. But there's a lot of stigmas, Bruce. There's body image, to Nathan, who talks about his diagnosis of autism. But the intersecting link is that mental health is affected. So that's how we approach it at Stigma Free. And we also have our student mental health toolkit, which is a no cost resource for the community, mainly for educators, school counselors, but also for families. And in this toolkit, there's a lot of resources to teach young people about mental health.
It can be really complicated to be a young person, especially in the world that experiences some turmoil popping up as we live with right now. So a lot of these kids have probably got some things they haven't quite recognized yet. Is that fair to say?
Oh, definitely. It's very interesting because I was doing some reading recently, and 50 and about 70% of mental illnesses actually show up actually before 18 years old, which is very interesting to me. I didn't really realize that until I started digging just a little bit deeper into some statistics. And, there are common problems between the children and teenagers, but their issues still have a great deal of difference because of their age.
It can be pretty terrifying for parents too, I think, can it?
Definitely can be terrifying for parents. And one of the things in the student mental health toolkit is our parents, guardians, and caregiver section. And so in this section at studentmentalhealthtoolkit.com, it is a place where parents can read about things like talking to your child about mental health, getting professional help. And there's other great partners like Dr. Shimi Kang and Family Smart, which is an organization dedicated to parents, because parents often feel so alone, but they are not. And there's a lot of help for them.
So let's focus on what you do. There's sort of two groups that you mentioned, grade 4, 5, 6, and 7 is one. So what's done with that cohort of kids?
Well, what is offered with the Student Mental Health Toolkit is there's a side that's grades 4 to 7 and 8 to 12. So we'll start with the young ones. In this section, all of the resources are tailored for that age. So there's similar resources, obviously, in the 8 to 12. But when you're looking at grades 4 to 7, they're very much developing their personalities. They're developing, and their mental health is affected in many ways. When you think about early years, if you're dealing with bullying, the effects of social media, and so many other things that can affect a child's development. But we provide resources, downloadable resources, lesson plans, and a lot of activities, even learning from comic books, quizzes, and making learning fun. So this toolkit is wonderful for young people. And as I said, with the virtual presentations, We even have a presenter who's 13 years old, Gia, and she talks about dyslexia and bullying. And a lot of these young people can relate to her. So we have those presentations, not just with the older ones, but with the younger ones too.
Yeah, when you mention social media, there is a lot of stuff that's online that people can access and kids and young people can access that might send them in the wrong direction. So consumption of that stuff has to
Mhm.
be very careful too.
Yeah, definitely. On our toolkit as well, on the parent section, we have 10 apps that are healthy and good for their children to learn about mental health. So there is a lot of very negative and scary information on the internet. We all know that, but there is a lot of good. And there is a lot of relevant information that could help people, that can provide them with the resources they need. And I think it's also important to emphasize that. But when you are Google searching, be very careful and make sure you're finding legitimate sources like Stigma Free Society.
I was going to say, reputable sources like you. So now we go into the grade 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. That's the teenage years.
Mhm.
That's been a whole storm of things for a long time, for many, many generations. But tell me about specific things to deal with teenagers.
Well, with teenagers, generally that is when mental illnesses are diagnosed. Like I said, before the age of 18, it's more prevalent in the teenagers. Of course, younger children can be diagnosed with mental illness, but the majority is for the teens. If you think about all of those emotions that you had at that age, everything is just so overwhelming. Uh, for instance, one thing people often don't think about is dating. When you're a teenager, your feelings are so intense, everything is so overwhelming. And we need to make sure that our teens have coping strategies. And so that's what the Student Mental Health Toolkit is really all about, is to ensure that young people, teenagers, know how to manage their mental health. A lot of times people aren't even talking about this stuff, but you will find there are signs when teenagers are suffering, like they isolate themselves. That's a huge one for sure. And when their behavior changes, yeah, we have to pay attention.
Well, they're coming into their own sexuality at that age too, which can be terribly confusing, especially if a child is figuring that they might be gay or they might be bi, and how they're going to handle that, how they're going to tell their
Yes.
parents, how they're going to tell their friends, all of that stuff, right?
Yeah, no, definitely for sure. And I think it's really important that we don't forget about that. That there are certain groups that face unique challenges, like the indigenous populations to LGBTQ community, as you just mentioned, as well people who have economic social factors, right, where they're facing poverty or other aspects of this kind, and as well too when young people have substance use problems, their mental health is deeply affected and is a big indicator that there needs to be something done. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Can we touch on what you do related to Indigenous youth? Because, of course, there are some ongoing systemic and societal issues that have been in play there for a long, long time that we're working our way through.
Yeah, for sure. So with our programs, they are virtual, which is deemed very helpful for the northern communities. And we've been told that as we've been doing some work specifically in Fort St. John, where we worked with their teachers up in their district, School District 60, Peace River North, and they used our toolkit. Many with the indigenous populations. And one thing I really want to work on more at Stigma Free Society is tailoring some resources around this particular population. It's something that we're currently really working on. And I feel like there's always room for improvement with our resources as well. So we're putting together a committee up in Northern BC, and we're looking for people who would like to help us tailor and make our resources appropriate for these populations. Because I find it's a very, very different perspective for sure.
Yeah, the rural versus the urban side of it too, because
Yes.
you do rural focused things like you talk about, right?
Yes, for sure. And so it's really great because if you think of Prince George as an example, how many times do they have a speaker on mental health walking into their classroom, right? So there really isn't the resources a lot of the times, and there are challenges. And even in indigenous populations, I've been doing some reading and just really getting more of a grasp. Stats Canada, as an example, says that indigenous youth, are 5 to 7 times that of non-indigenous youth in their suicide rates. So at a rate of 11 times greater. And so I think it's really important that we be paying attention to this. And in our downloadable resources, one thing we're going to be really focusing on is a discussion around suicide. That isn't something that we shy away from at Stigma Free Society. A lot of people think if you talk about suicide that you're going to be triggering people, they're going to go out and do it, when really these are vital conversations that we need to be having now.
Absolutely. Okay, next, we're going to do a question and answer, a Q&A form. Our guest on Chamber Chats today is Andrea Paquette, who is the president and co-founder of the Stigma Free Society. So you have like a true and false thing on your website, and I have some of the. Now, some of these seem like very obvious questions, but on the other hand, people who don't maybe have a grasp on this whole conversation or issue might think, for example, that if someone in your family has a mental illness, you will also be diagnosed with a mental illness. True or false? The answer, of course, is false. Yeah, right. Well, where does that stuff come from? That's just a misunderstanding or something that maybe somebody saw online or something?
Yeah, well, it is very interesting because when you have mental illness in the family, genetically, you are predisposed to a higher rate of potentially getting a mental illness. It doesn't mean that necessarily because your mother or father or whomever has a mental illness. Like, as an example, my mother has schizoaffective disorder, I have bipolar disorder, and my sister Christine has no mental illness. So it just all depends on the person, the way that they're made up genetically. So yeah, we need to steer away from thinking that we're doomed right from the start.
Okay, here's another beauty. Video games cause mental illness. True or false? That is
False.
false. Yes, of course. But where would that come from? Who would say that?
Well, excessive video game usage can be very negative, obviously, for your mental health. It could cause anxiety, sleep issues, not eating right. It just depends where we're channeling our energy. So I think really with that question is to get the point across that we need to be spending our time in a balanced way, right? And taking care of ourselves while we indulge in those forms of entertainment.
Speaking of that, here's one this is a fairly complicated question, and I'm very anxious to hear your answer or how you phrase an answer. If you see someone having a hard day, you should leave them alone and give them space.
That's false,
Yes.
in my opinion. And it's false on the Stigma Free Society website as well, because a lot of the time, if somebody's having a bad day, we may say, oh, we should just leave them be. We don't want to intrude. But there's nothing wrong with simply asking somebody, are you doing okay today?
Yeah.
And they will let you know if they want to be left alone or not. A lot of the times, igniting that conversation with somebody helps them know that they are not alone and that people care. So I always say it's great to make the ask.
Yeah, even if you're told to get lost or whatever it might be, make the effort. Right? But that takes a certain amount of courage too, to identify that someone's having an issue and be willing to put yourself on the line emotionally to deal with them.
Yeah. 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 It does take courage. And I think courage is important and we all have it in us. And really, it comes down to empathy. Think about how you would feel if something terrible happened to you one day and you were out and about doing your groceries and looking just so sad and downtrodden, and somebody just, you know, asked if you're all right. And I think it's about connection, human connection. And that's really what all of us want.
Yeah. Here's another one. True or false? Kids don't have panic attacks. They just yell or cry to get what they want.
False.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Panic attacks can happen at a very young age. For people who don't know, panic attack is ignited from anxiety. I had a panic attack once in my early 20s. And all of a sudden, it felt like my heart was racing out of my chest. I couldn't breathe. I really had this scary fight and flight response, they will call it, the medical term. And what that is thinking, that something terrible is happening to you and that even it feels like you're going to die. So a lot of times panic attacks are very misunderstood, but again, there's ways to manage them with medical professionals, and actually breathing techniques are very helpful for panic attacks and anxiety.
Yeah, the rest of that Q&A is on the website, by the way, which is stigmafreesociety.com. Andrea, how is all of this funded? How do you operate your organization? Where do you get the resource?
Yeah, so what's been very organic about our grassroots organization starting in 2010, we first started with $5,000 from a fashion show that we held at the Victoria Event Center. And over the years, we've been able to gain credibility and a lot of donors recognizing the worth in what we do. And our first biggest funder was TELUS Victoria. So that was back in 2013. So our donors are a range of family foundations, corporations, individuals, which we're trying to grow our individual donor base as well. And yeah, we can't forget community support like credit unions and municipal governments too.
Yeah, and you have some expansion for your service plan too. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so currently, as many people know, Stigma Free Society is well known and we do our work in British Columbia, but we're expanding across Canada because now we have the framework, the tools, the programs. And so at this point now, for me, this next year is going to be heavily emphasizing partnerships, especially with school districts across Canada. We've done a lot of work with the Winnipeg School Division, which is very exciting. And we even have a translation of our main Stigma Free Society website and Student Mental Health Toolkit into French as we aim for our sites into Quebec. So we are always open to partnerships, people spreading the word into the schools. And yeah, very exciting times for Stigma Free Society.
What else could people do to support you aside from financial contributions?
Oh, yeah, financial contributions are good, but there's always so much more that people can do. We have an engagement opportunity that we offer to people called the Inspiring Stories. So, if people want to share a little bit about their mental health journey, how they stay well, anything inspirational for young people to hear, a 2 to 3 minute video clip can go into our Student Mental Health Toolkit. We have over 70 right now. As well too, you could contact me to write a blog, share your thoughts, share your story. But the biggest thing that I'm really looking for is partnerships and people who can collaborate with us on different aspects.
Well, we're very proud to have you as a member of our Chamber of Commerce, that's for sure. And just to wrap it up here, Andrea, there are likely people listening and watching this right now who have in the past or are currently having some issues, struggling with their mental health. What would you say to those people?
There is help and there is hope. That is the biggest thing that I always want to emphasize. I felt like I was so alone when I was in that first hospitalization after my suicide attempt. I didn't really think there was anything left for me in life, but there are people who do want to help. And as well, too, I always encourage people come to our website at stigmafreesociety.com. It is vital. So you can start there. We have so many partners on our student mental health toolkit, and everything links to there. So I want people to know, and I always say, recovery looks different for everybody, but I believe no matter what our challenges, we can all live extraordinary lives.
As you have. Andrea Paquette is the president and co-founder of the Stigma Free Society. Andrea, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
I'm Bruce Williams. We'll see you again for another Chamber Chat.